Okay, so here's the idea with this framework. Normally, the way that SEO audits work is that you'll use a tool, you'll use the automated auditing feature, and you'll get a report. And that'll be it. And for most cases on smaller sites, that's fine. But on bigger sites, sites over 50,000 pages or more, that's not going to be enough, and you're going to miss a lot of the context. And there's just so much more data that you have that you're not using, especially if you're going to be creating tickets and solving a lot of these issues. You definitely need a bigger solution and a more enterprise solution, and that's what this is. So what this does, it doesn't ignore the automated audits, because those are important and they have their role. But it also focuses on two other pieces which are critical for a larger site. Again, it's a couple tens of thousands of pages or more. And that's the manual site auditing and the other piece, basically on the right hand side, whatever you want to call that. I call it data science, but it's a really critical piece that is really hard to look at and navigate through. So you need to automate that so that you're just getting the recommendations. And I'll kind of explain how that works. But really the whole idea here is that you have three pieces. You have your automated audits, which you're using through your tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz, Screaming Frog, etc. Really important to be in the UI looking at those tools. The manual site auditing, though, this is going into the site and basically looking at the inspector element, looking at source code. It's looking at log files, like log file analysis that you're using with like Botify or some of these other tools. It's talking and interviewing stakeholders in the analytics team, on the technical team in terms of when certain things were implemented. And it's looking at, front-facing elements using plugins. So Web Inspector in Chrome or Firefox, looking at things like, a page clock timer on Chrome. There's a plugin that'll show you a waterfall of every server request and which ones are the most time consuming. So, and that's with GT Metrics. There's another one with Pingdom. They both do the same thing. They offer plugins, but it's really valuable because you can see, and like on the front end, what's happening on a particular page. And there's literally dozens of or hundreds of other things that you could be looking at on the manual site auditing piece. So the idea is basically, you get your tools, you got your SEO tools, and then you go into the left-hand side here, which is you're going to go into the UIs directly. You're going to automate some of that so you have those audits working, and you're going to get a report, and that's going to be useful. But at the same time, you're going to start doing your manual site audit. And then there's checklists and everything like that. I won't go into a lot of detail with that, but there's basically a checklist that you would go through in your manual site audit of about 140, 180 things is what I use and seen. Some have way more, some have way less. And then when you have all that data, you're basically going to be a list of a ton of things that are problems, that at least that you think are problems on the site so far. And you're going to validate those with the data that you're going to be automating on the right-hand side shortly. But you're going to be left with a list of problems. Let's say you've looked at 180 things or more, and you're left with a short list of 80 potential issues, right? And you try to get as precise as possible. So for example, if you feel like pages are loading slowly, that's great. But you also, because you did a manual site audit, you know that it's timed interactive, and you know that it's a particular image that loads at the top of the page that's causing everything else to slow down. So you're much more cognizant of like what the specific issue is. And I would also recommend on a manual site audit that you actually have a PowerPoint open and just take screenshots of what you're finding and point arrows to it so that you can remember what the issues were. And it's going to be a big part of the final report. So with that short list of issues that you have, again, I'm just on the left-hand side, you're going to want to do a prediction model. So what you're trying to find out is, what is the value of these particular things? So there's a forecasting model that will look at traffic, and at this point, you know where most of your issues are. So you may say, let's take for example JCPenney. You may just say like watches is slower than boots, or you may say I'm seeing that this particular directory is slower than the other one. Whatever it is, by the time you've done a manual site audit, you have a pretty decent idea of where the issues are. So then the next thing is to look at traffic by each of those directories. And because you've done stakeholder interviews, you have a general timeline of when things happened over the past year. This day we launched this new plugin, this day we redesigned the site, etc. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to look back in time as those things were implemented, what impact they had on SEO. So what impact have metadata changes had on SEO? What impact has improving page speed or adding more content had on SEO, etc. And what this is all done through RStudio. And what you do with RStudio, you download it, you then connect it with your GA and Google Search Console account. I don't know if it'll work with Adobe or some of the other analytics tools, but with Google Analytics, it should plug in nicely. And then what you're going to do is set some parameters, which basically says, I want to predict what's going to happen to traffic by each of the directories. So then you can look back and say, like, these directories were affected by XYZ. So then you can tie that back into the issues that you found. So, but what it's basically doing, and I know I'm probably doing a poor job here of getting into the kind of technicalities, and hopefully that you're still with me and this is making sense. But the whole idea here is that you're trying to figure out what's going to happen based off of what's already happened with traffic. So, and this could be really alarming because I've seen some charts where, a directory is doing really well, but you don't notice it because it's just hard to notice a specific directory. But when these models start taking play, it's actually the traffic's dropping. So in the next 6 to 12 months, you could actually go down to 0. And this is a good way to also to find issues with algorithm updates, etc. But, a 2 or 3 page decrease, you don't see that. But when you plot out what's going to happen and it takes into consideration that decrease, pretty soon you're looking at a, 9 to 12 to 18 month forecast, and it's showing that you're on your way to 0. And that could be a big problem. That's why I like to look at Holtz winners and basically look at like what impacts that we've done, what things that we've done in the past have made an impact and where, and then tie that back into the manual site audits. And then you work in your recommendations and priority. Okay, it's basically coming up with a short list. Now there is one missing ingredient here, which is basically everything to the right, which is pretty key. Most of the tools that you use for SEI, they have the front end, the user interface. They also have a back end, which is their APIs. And you can tie most back-end APIs for most of the SEO tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Screaming Frog, etc., into a data repository like BigQuery or Supermetrics or some of the other ones that then tie into BigQuery. And what you're basically doing is you're feeding a database with all this data that you have in your tools. So it's a massive amount of data that you can collect, but the nice thing is that you can see the connection with things. So for example, Screaming Frog will tell you how many words are on a page, and Moz will tell you when the last cache date was in Google, and Google Search Console or a ranking tool will tell you where you're ranking for that page for a particular keyword. When you put everything in a database, you can then make a correlation between all those data sets to say, like, what impact do my pages with more words actually rank better, or do they load faster, or do pages with smaller size CSS or images actually get cached more frequently? You can make those connections, which is really critical. And that's where I use Dataiku. So basically the idea is have the API, have the tools, have the APIs for the tools, which you should get a decent amount of credits as a normal subscription. Feed those into BigQuery, just a couple YouTube videos of like how to connect SEMrush to BigQuery should give you that. And then what you're doing is using Dataiku to actually connect those pieces together. So, this metric from this tool with this metric to this tool, and then you run a predictive learning to figure out, is there correlation between those data sets? And that's where the training set comes in. And then you're also archiving it. So you have a database where you can archive that. I give it a file name, a timestamp, and then I rerun it occasionally, sometimes monthly, sometimes every quarter. And that's all being kind of housed in BigQuery, or sometimes I'll go into SQL databases. But basically you're building a repository of data, you're splitting it into machine learning and then archiving it. And then with the machine learning side, this is where Dataiku comes in. And then you can also use Power BI to visualize a lot of the data. You're trying to understand correlation. So like, do 404s even matter? Has a page that triggered a 404 ever correlated with a traffic loss? And page speed, is that important for my pages? Because some pages actually, all the pages on the search results page are slow or have worse page scores. So for that particular page, it may not be important. So that's kind of the idea with this, and that's where Dataiku come in. So there's a couple of tools that you need for this. BigQuery, Power BI, Dataiku are all free. RStudio is free. and then your SEO tools, which you should have. So I may do a video or a Udemy course on this as well, and if I do, I'll give you a free credit so you can see it and go through the especially the data IQ piece, because that'll show you how to get the data from the tools and do a correlation or prediction model. That'll show you, like, it'll answer all those questions we asked, like, does word count affect rankings, and do pages, should I be worrying about page speed for XYZ page? All right, so that's long-winded, 10 minutes actually. Hopefully that helps just give a little bit more clarity to this. At some point, I may just transcribe this and publish it as an article and see if that helps as well too. Holler with any questions. If you need anything, just let me know, man. Take care.